Hi, this is Dr. Pachenik, and I want to talk about the Normandy invasion. Of course, I was not there at the time. I came in way after, though 6, 7 years after the invasion. I came to France and I saw the prisoners of war. I saw the destruction of France, and I was very impressed by what our American soldiers had done to liberate France. Unfortunately, the New York Times really doesn't have the same respect for what we've done. And I'll give you an example. Roger Cohn's article on Trump being a miscreant while Trump is dedicating the valor and lauding the valor of our soldiers is totally inappropriate. Let me tell you why. President Trump said, look, I did not serve in the Vietnam War. I didn't like the war, and I refused to serve. Okay, I understand that. I may not agree with it. But nevertheless, the President of the United States became the President of the United States. And he said it very clearly. Look, I didn't serve in Vietnam, but I'm certainly making up for it as the President and Commander-in-Chief of the United States. I have battles every day. Now let's go to another character in Trump's life that's very important, but nobody talks about him. The man's name is John Trump, or Professor John Trump, PhD, professor at MIT since 1935 to 1973. This is Trump's uncle, his father's brother. And he was a major hero in World War II. He developed a lot of the theories on radiation therapy, on radiation, and went to England during the World War II and developed a theory on radar, helping the British, along with another famous scientist, Van de Graaff. Do we hear about him? No. Do we hear anything about the Trump family being important in World War II? No. Let me talk about another person who's exceedingly important in regards to World War II. That's Melania Trump. She comes from a country called Slovenia. Slovenia was attacked by the Nazis, the Italians, and Hungaries. It was chopped up. Yet her father, her grandfather, and others joined the communist partisan resistance against the Nazis. Let me tell you how vicious the Nazis were in Slovenia. They killed over 100,000 Slavs and had no problem killing, on top of that, another 900 Catholic priests. So when you look at Melania, don't think of her as just a beautiful woman who speaks 5 languages. Look at her as the history of Eastern Europe that fought against the German invasion and were successful, be it communist or non-communist. Now let's talk about those who did not serve in World War II and are very self-righteous. Oh, Mr. Macron, the president of France, refused to get into the draft in France. He said, it's not for me. I'm just going to study, and he became a banker. Nobody said he was a draft dodger except myself. Let's talk about Trudeau. He is a draft dodger, but more importantly, his father, who was Prime Minister of Canada, when Canadians, thousands and thousands of Canadians attacked Normandy and died in Normandy, his father, Prime Minister Trudeau, also refused to serve in the French army, although he was French Catholic. And in 1943, he wrote a paper on Christianity and communism and wrote an anti-conscription paper and refused to serve in the Canadian army, which was valor and glorious. But here we have a coward, but no one talks about the Trudeau cowards. Then let's go on to the other people who were there. Why were they there? Because an incredible invasion occurred. And whom do we have to thank? Above all else, there's a man who's not mentioned in all of this, and his name was Winston Churchill. Not the king or the queen. They had a kind of various background that may or may not relate to the Germans and Prince Edward and Mrs. Simpson with the Nazis, but I'm getting to a man who was exceedingly brave in England, and that was Churchill. Churchill refused to give up, and on Dunkirk, he asked that all the ships bring back the British officers and soldiers, and it was the Battle of Britain in which one of my cousins fought in, and they were successful in turning back the Luftwaffe. Now, the Luftwaffe had determined that they could destroy England, and by destroying England, then Hitler could march on to Russia. That was a big mistake. Who else was a hero in this war? The Russians. And we must pay tribute to the Russians who died in the millions in Stalingrad, because the Battle of Stalingrad in 1941 turned the tide of war. I want to also thank two generals that are never really talked about in our own history. One, of course, is Eisenhower, who became a president, but ironically, he had never served in battle, and at the age of 59, he was still a young lieutenant colonel. But because he was brilliant in strategy and tactics and taught at the War College, George Marshall, his superior, who also had never served in a combat situation or a leader in the combat situation, created the strategy for 2 wars, which we defeated both the Japanese and the Nazis within 4 years. Those are the real unsung heroes of our history. As Patton said, let us mourn the death of our warriors, but let us be more grateful for the fact that they were alive and they served this country immensely. Thank you and good night.